August 4th, 2022 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:01. Got 3 members present. Tonight got Greg Caesar, Jeff Fleschauer, and Jonathan Langley. Staff announcements?
There are no announcements.
Okay. So next, we will consider approval of the July 7th, 2022 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Motion made by Greg. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, July 7th meeting minutes are approved. Our first item tonight, it's going to be 3 variance requests. Bear with me as I go through this caption. Variance requests to allow more than the maximum number of retaining walls on a site. That's the first one. The second one is a variance request to allow a taller than allowable retaining wall within a front yard. That's the second one. And the third one, it's actually 4. Third one is variance request to allow a taller than allowable retaining wall within a side rear yard. And fourth, a variance request to allow for encroachments into areas with slopes of 20% or greater for the property located at 1229 Road of the Round Table. Staff?
Thank you. This is a 5.26 acre lot located at 1229 Road of the Round Table within the Avalon subdivision. It's zoned PD for Planned District. The applicant wishes to develop the parcel with a single family home, the designs of which can be seen in the applicant's submitted materials. The development was approved prior to the establishment of the HHO district and the 500-foot buffer of the hillside overlay. This property now lies within that 500-foot buffer of the hillside overlay. A large portion of the lot's covered in slopes with grades over 20%, making the buildable area for the property just a small portion of the site. This topography also creates difficulties for site design and development, as the Franklin zoning ordinance does not allow for development on slopes greater than 20% to protect natural features. In addition, the Avalon subdivision architectural guidelines require 2-story houses to be a minimum of 5,000 square feet. The applicant has provided designs for the city of Franklin to preliminarily review, and staff determined that 4 variances would needed to approve the provided designs. These variances are to allow encroachment into areas with a slope of 20% or greater, to allow more than a maximum allowed 3 retaining walls on a residential site, to allow for retaining walls to be higher than maximum 2 feet when in a front yard, and to allow for retaining walls to be higher than the maximum 6 feet when in a rear side yard. So I am going to go ahead and go over request 1, which is the encroachments into area with slopes of 20% or greater. I am going to read the criteria as we go over them, but I'm only going to read them for the first request, so we don't have as much to go over. And if you need clarification, I'm happy to provide it. So the first criteria is that where by reason of exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a specific piece of property at the time of the enactment of the zoning ordinance, or by reason of exceptional topographic conditions or other extraordinary and exceptional situation or condition, such a piece of property is not able to accommodate development as required under the zoning ordinance. The subject property is located on a hilltop within the Avalon subdivision with over 20% slopes across much of the property, with additional areas of 10 to 20% slopes. These slopes lead to exceptional topographic conditions which require the encroachment on some 20% slopes in order to provide access and support development. The variance is the minimum necessary deviation from the requirements of the zoning ordinance in order to develop the lot. Therefore, staff finds the criteria for request 1 to be met. Criteria 2 is that the strict application of any provision enacted under the zoning ordinance would result in peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties to, or exceptional or undue hardship upon, the owner of the property. Strict application of the zoning ordinance would create practical difficulties in the development of this site due to the exceptional topographic conditions that exist. Staff finds that the criteria for request 1 criteria 2 for request 1 is met. The third criteria is that such relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantially impairing the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Allowing for encroachment into areas with slopes of 20% or greater on the site would not be a detriment to the public good, nor would it impair the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance, because the Avalon PUD subdivision was approved by the City of Franklin prior to the adoption of the Hillside Hillcrest Overlay Zoning District, or the HHO, and today's applicable slope development standards, and therefore development on the steep hillsides, was anticipated when the development was originally approved. Staff finds that criteria 3 for request 1 is met. Staff analysis for request 2, which is the maximum number of retaining walls. Regarding criteria 1, staff finds that the existing slopes on the subject property provide exceptional topographic conditions, and they require the use of retaining walls to provide effective drainage, access, and support for development. Staff finds that criteria 1 for request 2 is met. Regarding criteria 2, strict application of the zoning ordinance would create practical difficulties in the development of this site due to the exceptional topographic conditions that exist. The applicant has designed a home that attempts to avoid the 20% slopes that dominate the site, and in doing so needs to address drainage and support concerns with the use of retaining walls because of the additional slopes in the developable area. Due to the significant slopes across the site, additional walls are needed to develop the site. Therefore, staff finds that criteria 2 for request 2 is met. In regards to criteria 3, allowing for additional retaining walls on the site would not be a detriment to the public, nor would it impair the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Due to the parcel's location being adjacent to common open space and its location atop a heavily wooded hilltop, very little of the home would be visible from the street and neighboring properties. Thus, there is no direct conflict with the intent of the zoning ordinance. Staff finds that criteria 3 for request 2 is met. Staff's analysis for request 3, which is the maximum height of the front yard retaining wall, is in regards to criteria 1, is that there are exceptional topographic conditions which require the use of retaining walls to provide effective drainage, access, and support for development. And due to the exceptional slope conditions across the site, staff finds the criteria 1 for request 3 is met. Criteria 2 states that staff's findings are that strict application of the zoning ordinance would create practical difficulties in the development of this site due to exceptional topographic conditions that exist. Retaining walls of greater height are needed to develop the site, and therefore staff finds that criteria 2 for request 3 is met. Criteria 3. In regards to criteria 3, allowing for taller retaining walls in the front yard of this site would not be a detriment to the public good, nor would it impair the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Staff finds that criteria 3 for request 3 is met. Request 4, the maximum height of rear or side yard retaining walls. In regards to criteria 1, there are exceptional topographic conditions which require the use of retaining walls to provide effective drainage, access, and support for the development. Due to the exceptional slope conditions across the site and to ensure proper drainage and structural integrity of the proposed development, staff finds the criteria 1 for request 4 is met. In regards to criteria 2, strict application of the zoning ordinance would create practical difficulties in the development of the site due to the exceptional conditions that exist. Staff finds that criteria 2 for request 4 is met. In regards to criteria 3, allowing for taller retaining walls in the rear and side yard of the site would not be a detriment for public good, nor would it impair the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Due to the parcel's location being adjacent to an open space and atop a wooded hilltop, very little of the home would be visible from the street and neighboring properties. Thus, there is no direct conflict with the intent of the zoning ordinance, and staff finds that criteria 3 for request 4 is met. This is an advisory note that was included that I thought was necessary to read just for public record, but that while the submitted plans do show a tennis court and a greenhouse in the front yard, a variance request was not submitted for those things, and no accessory structures are allowed within the front yard per chapter 3.10.7 dimensional standards. This is something that was discussed with the applicant, and they are perfectly fine with removing those things. It was just not done when they submitted these plans. The final proposed plan shall go through the building permit review and approval process, and any aspect of the design that do not receive variance approval shall meet all City of Franklin development standards. The applicant shall be advised that there are concerns regarding emergency fire access to the proposed residence, and requirements to address these concerns shall be addressed during the building permit review. The recommended motion for this evening is to move to approve the variance request to allow for additional retaining walls on the site in excess of the allowed 3 per lot, allow for retaining walls up to 11 feet in the front yard, allow for retaining walls up to 10 feet in the rear yard, and allow encroachment into areas with slopes of 20% or greater on the property located at 1229 Road of the Round Table, because all criteria required for granting a variance have been met as described in the staff report. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, staff. That's a mouthful there.
Yes.
All right, is the applicant present? If you could step forward for us and state your name for the record, that would be great.
Thank you, Chelsea. Good evening, Josh Bethay with CSDG, located at 2305 Klein Avenue in Nashville. We're the planners, civil engineers, and landscape architects on the project. We've been in conversation with Chelsea and agree with the advisory note that the structures that were mentioned will be removed in the site plan submittal. Should our client want to proceed with those, we know that that's another variance that we would have to apply for at a later date. The emergency fire access that was mentioned we've had some preliminary discussions with the fire marshal's office, and we'll further those discussions through the permit process.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next, we'll open the public comment. I will mention, I do have speaker cards for each item. So this public comment is really specific to the 1229 Road of the Round Table. But we'll go ahead and open the public comment if there are additional comments on this item. All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close public comment.
Motion made by Greg. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Seeing no one opposed, the public comment is closed. Any questions from the board at all?
I have a question, and it's particularly about the height of the retaining walls. I know there's current guidance on non-continuous elevated retaining walls and being made of a particular structure. I don't see in our recommendation or our report that we made any recommendation or any requirement to break that retaining wall so that it's non-contiguous. Is that of concern for staff? Or perhaps if this has been a topic of discussion?
So it was not something that was suggested. When it was brought forward, the variance request is taken at what the applicant requests. Staff in the BZA review process doesn't make a lot of, there's not a lot of back and forth on trying to make concessions for their design.
Mm-hmm.
We did vocalize our concern about the encroachment. When they requested deferral, we clarified some information, including the 5,000 square foot minimum of the home. And that does constrict a lot of this site as a result of that. And there's just not, the applicant may be able to speak more to the design of the walls, but on our side of things, that's kind of how we approach it.
Yeah. I would just say, while you're coming to the podium, I think the concern of having a 15-foot wall that's all vertical and there's nothing to break it up is probably the intent of us not having retaining walls that are a certain elevation. So I don't know how you respond to that. And granted, these may not be visible from the street because of location.
Sure. Yeah, I think in regard to those heights, I guess did the best that we could to minimize our impact on the 20% slopes. So the focus was primarily around the 20% slopes. I think by terracing some of these walls, we might have to encroach into those 20% slopes a little bit more. So that was part of our reasoning. Trying to make up grade as quickly as possible, transitioning from a low wall to a maximum. We only have a couple occasions where those walls are tall.
I saw 8 was kind of where it seemed to stick out the most to me. I didn't see a whole lot.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
8 feet seemed to be the higher ones in the front yard, and then
Correct.
maybe the greater heights in the backyard,
Correct.
behind the house.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, the 4 requests are related. We could split these up if we feel like they're, I'm fine taking these as one motion. But if we need to split them up, if there's an opinion there, we can. So if there's no other questions, I'm ready to entertain a motion when a board member's ready.
I'd be prepared to move to approve the variance request to allow for additional retaining walls on the site in excess of the allowed 3 per lot, and allow for retaining walls up to 11 feet. And this is the one I'm going to maybe ask for staff for help on my motion, because I'm concerned about the non-contiguousness or the facade and what it would present perhaps of just an 11-foot. And I do appreciate your perspective on kind of trying to make up grade as quickly as we can. But I do believe there's an intent component in that ordinance that we should be conscious of here. So staff, do you have any suggestions?
One of the suggestions that you could consider is that when we have a series of commercial walls, we limit it to one 10-foot wall or two 8-foot walls separated some distance, just for a similar regulation we have in the ordinance that we allow in other places, if that helps.
It's a good point, yeah, because, I mean, the way that this is written is we're allowing them for additional retaining walls, but we're not putting a cap on it. And so theoretically, they could put a number of retaining walls here, right? So move to approve the variance request to allow for additional retaining walls on the site in excess the allowed 3 per lot, but not to exceed. Is there a number of them right now so that we don't have them? I don't know if staff has an opinion here that would help us.
Yeah, quick count on it, we're in the 12 to 14 total wall range. I think the wall that you're speaking about is an 11-foot height wall, kind of on page 2 of our exhibits. There's a grading plan, preliminary grading plan. There's a curve in the driveway there. We could modify that area most likely to terrace that a little bit more so that there's not an 11-foot wall at that point.
I guess that would also increase the number of walls. So if we're looking at a maximum, that
Sure.
it's increasing the.
One thing to consider is the language on the variant on the actual motion. It is important, but they also have a plan attached to this. That is something that will be referenced in terms of the variance. It may add to say like something along the lines of like meeting the plan as proposed. Emily, sorry.
I would say, in terms of your motion, you can always move to approve the variance with conditions as well. So if you would like to potentially approve it, but with a condition that no retaining wall exceed a certain maximum height, and that, in order to stabilize the rest, that the walls be staggered, essentially, that would be okay. In terms of our zoning ordinance, when it was written, for non-residential and mixed-use sites, it was determined by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and Planning Commissioners and through the public process that the maximum wall height desired would be 10 feet for a single wall, but 8 foot if it were going to be 2 staggered walls. Residential obviously had much lower heights associated with it, but in terms of massing and the kind of visual impact that the board thought was appropriate to see in the city, those are really the maximum heights. So even though this is a residential site, I do think you could use that as guidance for what kind of the tolerance originally was considered in the intent of the ordinance for one single or staggered wall. So if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Emily. I think I'm in a position where I can put forward a motion. So I'd like to move to approve the variance request to allow for additional retaining walls on the site in excess of the allowed 3 per lot, and allow for retaining walls not to exceed 10 feet in the front yard, and allow for retaining walls up to or not to exceed 10 feet in the rear yard, and allow encroachments into the areas with slopes of 20% or greater on the property, which is located at 1229 Road of the Round Table, because in my opinion, all criteria required for granting a variance have been met and have been described by the staff report.
Okay, so motion made for approval, and it follows the recommended motion in the staff report with the exception of the 10 11 feet.
10 foot for the front yard.
Yep, so in the staff report, it's worded allow for retaining walls up to 11 feet, so we're changing that in the motion to 10 feet in the front yard.
And we're not denoting the number of walls, so you could terrace that still.
Okay. Motion for approval made, and that covers all 4 variance requests. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion at all? I think my main concern is just making, I know we're not designing the site, there may be specific walls, so that's my only concern, that we're all, like, I don't want the applicant to come tonight expecting one thing and then we've redesigned the whole site for them. Based on 10 feet, are we comfortable there, based on what you've requested initially?
Yes, sir, I think we can make that work.
Thank you.
Just don't want to have problems later on, so.
No, John, and I think maybe to give a little bit of perspective there, I do think there is some important component to not having just an 11, 12, 15-foot tall wall. And 10 feet seems to be a reasonable kind of top limit. And we can, and as long as that works for our applicant, I think I'm happy to put forward that motion.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree as well. So we've got a motion, have a second for approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, so all 4 requests are approved for 1229 Road of the Round Table. So next we'll move to item number 2. There are 2 variance requests. We've split these in half now. So 2 variance requests. The first one is to allow for a taller than allowable retaining wall within a front yard. And the second is a variance request to allow for a taller than allowable retaining wall within a side rear yard for the property located at 609 Prince Valiant Court. Staff?
Thank you. This 0.45 acre parcel is located at 609 Prince Valiant Court within the Avalon subdivision and is zoned PD for Planned District. The applicant has developed the lot with a single-family home supported by 2 retaining walls. The applicant has provided designs for the city of Franklin for preliminary review, and staff determined that 2 variances would be needed to approve the provided designs. And these variances are allowing for retaining walls to be higher than the maximum 2 feet when in the front yard, and to allow retaining walls to be higher than a maximum 6 feet in the side or rear yard. The applicant has gone through the building permit process and received approval based on plans that met the ordinance requirements for both the rear and side and front retaining walls. As the home was built, the contractor and engineer found that the walls would need to be built higher and proceeded with building the building of the walls without verification with the Building and Neighborhood Services Department. This resulted in a stop work order and the direction that the walls that were built would require a variance request. The provided as-built show what is existing on the site today. Staff's analysis of request 1, which is the maximum height of front yard retaining walls. Regarding criteria 1, The subject property is located within Avalon subdivision, which is predominantly covered in slopes. The Franklin zoning ordinance allows for retaining walls located in the front yard of a residence to be a maximum of 2 feet in height. The applicant has requested to keep the existing retaining wall that is up to 10.39 feet in height in the front yard to ensure correct support and drainage on the site. Due to the exceptional slope conditions across the site, staff finds that criteria 1 is met for request 1. In regards to criteria 2, due to the exceptional slope conditions across the site, retaining walls of greater height are needed to develop the site, and therefore staff finds that criteria 2 is met for request 1. In regards to criteria 3, the Avalon subdivision has many lots that have been granted variance for retaining wall height. The granting of this variance would not result in aesthetic concerns for neighboring property owners and the community as a whole. Allowing for taller retaining walls in the front yard of this site would not be a detriment to the public good, nor would it impair the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Staff finds that criteria 3 for request 1 is met. Request 2 is the maximum height, is a variance for the maximum height of the side and rear yard retaining walls. In regards to criteria 1, the subject property is located as stated in the Avalon subdivision, which is predominantly covered in slopes. The Franklin zoning ordinance allows for retaining walls located in the side and rear yard of residents to be a maximum of 6 feet in height. The applicant has requested to keep the existing retaining wall that is up to 8.33 feet in height in the side and rear to ensure correct support and drainage on the site. Due to the exceptional slope across the site, staff finds that criteria 1 for request 2 is met. In regards to criteria 2, strict application of the zoning ordinance would create practical difficulties in the development of the site due to the exceptional topographic conditions that exist. Due to the exceptional slope across the site, retaining walls of greater height are needed to develop the site, and therefore staff finds that the criteria 2 for request 2 is met. Lastly, in regards to criteria 3, the Avalon subdivision has many lots that have been granted variances for retaining wall height. The granting of this variance would not result in aesthetic concerns for the community as a whole. Allowing for taller retaining walls in the side and rear yard of this site would not be a detriment to the public good, nor would it impair the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Staff finds that criteria 3 for request 2 is met. The recommended motion is to move to approve the variance request to allow for a taller than allowable retaining wall within a front yard, and a variance request to allow for a taller than allowable retaining wall within a side and rear yard for the property located at 609 Valiant Court, Prince Valiant Court, because the 3 criteria for granting a variance have been met. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, staff. Is the applicant present for this item? If you could step forward for us and state your name for the record.
Good evening, gentlemen. Dino Elefante, contractor licensed in the state of Tennessee. Built the home at 609 Prince Valiant. It's a challenge up there, guys. I think you guys know that already. But in order for us to maintain a first floor elevation to have manageable access to the garage and driveway for the applicants, this was the result.
Okay. Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, the walls were engineered and everything. There's an approved landscape plan submitted, by the way, to enhance the look of the walls.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. So next we'll open the public comment. Are there any citizen comments on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
I do have one question. Was there any additional, we did receive some email citizen comments on this. Was there any additional that maybe came in beyond what we received?
There were not. There were only the ones that were sent to you yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah. Motion to close the public hearing?
Okay. So motion made by Greg to close the public comment. Is there a second? Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So seeing none opposed, the public comment's closed on this item. Questions from the board at all?
Maybe I'm going to ask Emily if she can share with us the front yard height that's 2 feet again. Is that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's 2 feet.
You were giving us commercial heights before, and that's what threw me off. So 2 feet is a required limitation for front yard. Is there, and 3 is the maximum number of walls that can be in the front yard or in the entire property?
On the entire property, and there are only 2 walls on this property, so.
So we've got a wall, I guess, the front wall or the front yard retaining wall is 10 feet, a little over 10 feet, and then the rear yard is 8.33 to be exact. Okay. Any other questions at all?
I mean, I can see from the plat, and I can see from some of the photos that this is very visible to the street, this retaining wall, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Similar to the first request, these are related. We can split them if we need to, but we can also take them together.
The wall terraces down from 8 feet to about 3.
At the end.
Yes,
I see it in the photo here. I suppose if we, I don't know.
Take your time, Greg. If
I'm not
Yes.
look,
staff can also stall by pulling up pictures for us or something. While you kind of think through things or ask questions too. No, we're not in a rush, so there's,
I think yeah, each one stands on its own. I think as I look at this, the concern is, we've heard from the public that they're concerned about it. I think it certainly goes against our variance, our guidance from the zoning ordinance. I think it's very visible. And I think there potentially could be even some, maybe, I'm not the one to speak, but potentially some safety concerns with having such a substantial height in the front yard. And
could we pull up the images, I guess, in the packet just to kind of,
yeah, that's what I was.
It has a 4-foot fence on top of it.
On the front and back?
Yes, sir. Not the front.
Okay.
On the back, there's no walkway or passage.
thanks, Bill.
Yeah, as I stated, there's no sidewalk or anything in the back. It's the guy's backyard, and when they remodeled the house actually back there, they built up their backyard about 3 feet. And the front, there's a safety fence all along the walkway.
So we're looking at that front
Didn't even
retaining
see
wall
the-
now then.
The
Yeah,
photos
there it is.
And I don't suppose there's an opportunity to terrace that retaining wall? I mean, aside from the construction cost, I think that would be my,
In the front,
yeah.
build another one?
Yeah.
It'd be difficult.
Okay.
I mean, it's a real unknown when you start building a house at Avalon. It's very difficult. And we had to keep the driveway and the garage that are manageable. We didn't want to go down to the driveway or go up to the elevation of the garage. And this is not completely graded. The grade will be a little higher, actually. We didn't go any further with landscaping or grading.
Until you get the approval.
Right. But we're gonna come up. The homeowner's planning on coming up on that wall. And it'll be landscaped.
So maybe to Emily's comment earlier, if we are concerned about the wall height. I know we're looking at, if we approve the variance, kind of blanket, so we could add conditions, assuming that it's kind of within the realm of. Roughly how far are the walls from the street?
60 feet. We got that wall back as far as we could. I mean, and even under there, the grade is so unstable and the soil is so unstable. Footings are enormous. If you looked at the engineered design of the footings in the wall.
It would need to be if it's 10 foot tall.
Yeah, it was really hard.
What's your slope on your driveway? What's your percentage?
0. It's a side entry off the street.
Yeah, I was looking at it, but that might be beneficial to pull up the plan. Did you come in here, and in the front is where the slope is?
No.
So there must be a pretty substantial slope on it.
That's what he's stuck with.
Maybe the next one, number 4-422. Oh gosh, I don't know what it's called in there.
That very top link.
That
I
one,
think that's
yep.
the full plan right there.
So the driveway entrance is here. It is, I don't have a great. I still go back to the intent of the ordinance in its most pure and native state is so that you don't have these large retaining walls visible to the public as they're walking down, driving down, or traversing around these properties. And for that reason, I would make a motion to disapprove the variance request.
Okay.
Would
So-
it do me any good to tell you that there's probably about 90 of them like that in the neighborhood? It's just impossible to build without having to do this, guys. It's just really tough. And this wall was very well engineered. It functions very well. It looks really good on the house. None of the neighbors that I've spoken to have had a problem with them. There's an approved landscape plan for it, and it allows for the house to exist in its state.
So we have a motion for disapproval, and that would be for both variance requests. Is there a second?
Is there any discussion on the motion? It has to happen after a second, sorry.
I'll second the motion for discussion.
Yeah. Because
I think, so here's my concern. I definitely agree with retaining wall height. You go to other cities and it sticks out like a sore thumb. A lot of those don't have landscaping with them, so I think landscaping can mitigate issues. I do know Avalon is a challenging subdivision. We're kind of dealing with an existing lot, so the home's on the lot. I feel like if we could work through conditions that would kind of mitigate the height factor, that could be a way to think through this item.
And when you say conditions, are you thinking perhaps build up in front to reduce the visible height of the wall?
Yeah, so the applicant, I guess, mentioned, it sounded like building up the dirt above the wall, up to the wall.
Yes, sir. Also, when I had Delta do the as-built, I did it to the footing. Not that much of the wall shows. Not even close. And again, the wall in the front that they just showed with the gate, it goes down to 2 feet. It starts in the front like that, and as the sidewalk wraps around, it gets really low.
So from grade to the top of the wall, what is our height? Because that's what we measure, right? Not the design. We measure from grade to the top.
Yeah,
of the
but Delta, when they submitted the drawing, they did it to the footing.
So what would we,
So in lieu of 10.33, what is it going to be?
I think about 8 feet will show.
So I'll ask for your help, Bill. So we're treading down a disapproval path. If we go a different direction, what's the proper path we should take there?
Not sure what you mean by different direction exactly. It sounds like maybe you're thinking about conditions. What's before you right now is a motion to deny the variance request. It has a second. That would be what you vote on next, after you deliberated. If you want conditions, if that's kind of the discussion route you want to go, then you need a motion to approve with conditions, and then you talk about the conditions. But, you know, you might want to move to approve and then discuss the conditions and amend it to add those if you're not sure what they're going to be. Otherwise, you'll just kind of be chasing your tail, adding conditions back and forth over and over. Does that make sense?
Yep.
it does. Can I withdraw my motion? Or do we just need to vote?
We can vote it down.
You can withdraw your motion as long as the second to your motion doesn't oppose that.
We can vote.
That is the rule.
So we've got a motion for disapproval. Got a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so one vote for disapproval, two against?
2 against.
Two against. So motion for disapproval fails. So we're back at starting clean slate.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the variance with considerations. Do we need to define, Bill, do we need to define the specific considerations in the motion?
Yes, I mean, whatever they're going to be. If you want to get it on the floor first with a second to approve and then deliberate about what you might want to add, I think that would be perfectly fine. Once someone is settled on that, you move to amend it and add those conditions, get a second to that, vote on the conditions being added, vote on the full motion. Does that make sense?
I mean,
I'm good with that. I think that's going to be the best way to handle it.
okay.
So motion for approval with conditions. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
So motion for approval and a second. Discussion?
I would say, given the circumstances of the lot and what Dino's having to deal with, that I think if we ask him to build up an additional 2 feet in front of the wall, that would bring the wall to 8 feet, roughly 8 feet. Given the circumstances in Avalon, that there are quite a few retaining walls in the subdivision, which is a norm, which is something we've always considered in the past. I think we should approve it with that condition.
8 foot visible?
8
To grade,
visible
8 foot to
with
grade?
substantial landscaping.
Okay.
I think 8 feet feels too much in the front yard there, but I don't know if it's reasonable for us to
Well,
ask him to
if we
put
go
4
any
foot on
less
top
than
of
that,
it.
he's gonna have to tier it, and he's gonna have to do another wall. And that's something we can ask of him.
In 60 feet?
What's the setback?
You said earlier, I think you said 60 foot from there to
I
the
don't
street
know.
about.
I'd have to look at that better. I'm not positive what the setback is, but it's, and keep in mind, gentlemen, the one in the back allows for them to pull out of the garage and turn around. And that wall was only supposed to be about 5.5 feet. And when the guy behind us built up his grade and wouldn't do anything about it, Michael Garman and I stood out there and scratched our head and said, this thing's got to get taller. Or we're going to have dirt and mud and rocks in their driveway when they come out in the morning to pull out of the garage. That was the dilemma. And that one's only 8.7.
Yeah.
It looks like the front yard setback, at least on the plan, is 25 feet per the plat.
So to go 4 feet's not realistic. It's a short distance.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask for clarity for staff's sake, if maybe your conditions are discussed by retaining wall, so that you have what conditions apply to the front yard wall and which ones apply to the rear wall, just so that we're clear on what to enforce? I think that might help us. Thank you.
Excellent point.
I'm afraid 8 feet is too much, and
Okay.
is my concern. I mean, that's a pretty substantial wall, and it's unfortunate that it's already been built, and we're
Right.
having to kind of work with it after the fact. And I don't think that we should consider the fact that it's there as a function of our decision.
I agree with that.
Even though it's frustrating, I'm certain,
Right.
there's a reason the codes were in place, and maybe we could have done it on the front side. We could have come to a better situation here, but, and I'm not an architectural slope design engineer, so I don't know if you can go from adding 4 feet of fill in front of the wall down to street level in 25 feet. I don't know if that's reasonable, or if you're going to require them to put another retaining wall in
He
there to
would
break
probably
that
have
up.
to do another one. Joel would be more apt to comment on that, but I would say, yeah, intermediately at 25, he could do something, but it's,
So I guess to kind of address Emily's question, so
I'm speaking predominantly about the front yard
Yeah.
wall
Yeah.
right now, yeah.
so we could split it up and approve the side yard.
yeah, we could,
Or we could deny the front yard and let him revisit it and come back to staff with another design.
so we've got a motion for approval that includes both. So maybe we'll be decisive and figure this out.
But with conditions, and the conditions perhaps could be that we approve the rear yard and that we disapprove the front yard.
I would almost, I would say let's split them up is kind of what I'm thinking, just for clarity.
Split the motions entirely.
Yeah. So what if we,
I think that would be good. I also think if, instead of trying to like design on the fly without an engineer,
Oh, they're just gonna deny it.
that denial is probably a more
That's correct.
appropriate measure to go until an engineer can look at it and submit a proposal that is more in line with what you think meets the intent of the ordinance.
so here's a question there. So in the past, if an item's come for the Board of Zoning Appeals, it can only come once. So would deferral be a better option for them to look at it?
You could defer. The thing is if they come back in with a different variance request for a different height or staggered walls or something like that to replace the existing wall, that would be a different variance request. So that could be considered, but if we're going to talk about the same request as it's written right now, that would be deferral. Do you agree, Bill? And I would say in terms of staff and conditions, anything really outside of reviewing height of landscaping or landscaping materials is probably going to be hard for us to really enforce without having a newly designed plan stamped and sealed by an engineer. So just for guidance.
So for simplicity, deferral would be the preferred method for staff as opposed to us denying it and having them resubmit?
Deferral means you're going to be considering the same request next meeting. A disapproval would mean that the applicant would have to redesign.
Does one or the other put additional hardship on the applicant as far as kind of going through the process?
Disapproval, essentially is your message saying that the wall, that you're not ready to approve a variance for the wall as it exists today, and that it will need to come down and they'll have to do a new design for the wall. I mean, that's the message I would convey to the applicant if that was your motion. So I think that's what you need to really think through is if you're not okay with the wall height as it already exists today, then really you're telling the applicant, bring us something different back. We want it torn down and redesigned. If you're okay with the height but want to soften it with landscaping or, bring, with what sounds like it's probably going to be 8 feet visible, and how that landscape's designed, that's more of a conditional approval. So it just depends on where you land on that.
Okay, so to recap, we've got a motion for approval that addresses both variance requests. We're in discussion on conditions. I think I'm torn on this one. I get the intent of the wall heights. I think landscaping does a lot on buffering. One wall I think about is, so I think I looked at this plan years ago, coming up McEwen Drive.
I know which one you're talking about, yeah.
And I drive by that, when I saw it on the plan, I'm like, wow, how is this gonna work? And once the landscaping filled in, I drive by there and I'm more concerned about staying on the road than I am the wall. So I think there's a way to mitigate the height. I know each variance request stands on its own, but I know we've approved variance requests in Avalon in the past. And we just approved one in the previous item with some stipulations. It's tough to design a site. I think staff even mentioned that. It's tough to know how impact on the height will change. Because even if we said, decrease the wall height to 4 feet, in my mind, I'm thinking, I think there's enough, drop there, but depending on soils, that may be a worse scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're not here to design the solution. I think
If I could add one more thing. The part of the wall that's 10 feet is the easiest part to fill. It shows the most right now. We could get the most soil in that part of the wall, no problem.
So I think what we probably need to do is deny the approval or deny the request for the front yard wall and vote on that, and maybe split them into two like you talked about earlier.
Okay.
And make a decision on the back wall, put forward a different, no, defer, deny.
I don't know what path you're going down.
I
I'm sorry.
think we're probably going back to splitting up request 1, request 2.
Yeah. I think we're more comfortable, it seems that I personally, I'm not going to speak for the board, but I personally am more comfortable with the backyard wall. So I don't want the applicant to have to come back through with that with that request.
Can,
I think the
Bill,
topic
can they
of-
amend the motion to split
Yes.
the request?
So right now you have a motion to approve with conditions that were undefined. We're going to discuss the conditions, perhaps amend to add the conditions once you're settled on them. After deliberations now, you've decided to, it sounds like to me, approve one of the walls, the backyard wall. So you can amend that motion to be approval of the backyard wall separate from the other wall. Get a second on the amendment, vote on the amendment to amend the motion, and then you're back to that square with approving the backyard wall.
In that motion, do we have to separate the front yard wall?
No, it just redefines what you're approving.
Okay, so the motion to approve, did I submit the motion?
It's a motion to be clear, it's a motion to amend from approval of both walls with conditions to approval of the backyard wall separate from the front yard wall. And that's an amendment, needs a second vote, and then you're on that motion to approve the backyard.
So we have to make a
wall.
motion to amend the motion that we haven't voted on yet?
Yes,
Okay.
while it's on the floor.
Can anyone make the motion to amend?
Yes.
Are we good?
Yeah. Go ahead if you want to go ahead and amend it. Yep.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion that we're currently discussing to include the approval only of the rear yard retaining wall.
Okay, so motion made to amend, so now we have the motion, we're only looking at the backyard retaining wall. That's a motion for approval, right, Greg?
Correct.
Okay.
The motion to amend needs a second.
Somebody has to
If you're
second
going
it.
to do that.
I'll second.
And then you vote on the amendment to get it onto the original motion.
Okay.
We have to have two votes here.
Yep, so motion to amend made, there's a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, seeing none, so the motion to amend has been approved.
So now you're
The
back
original motion
on
has to be approved.
the main motion to approve now the front wall with conditions. And you need to stipulate, make an amendment if you want to add conditions or just vote on it, how,
We already amended the motion right now, so what we're voting on is the motion to approve with the amendments, right? So that's the package.
You've just amended the original motion, so
Yeah.
it is now just a motion to approve the backyard wall. The end, nothing else.
Okay,
If you want to add other things or do a separate motion for the front yard, those are your two options. You can amend to add the front yard and discuss that. You can address the front yard in a separate motion.
so you
sorry,
amended
one
them,
sec.
you amended the motion to, so we're looking English sense here. I'm climbing the ladder and climbing down, and we're taking 3 and 4 ladders on the sides. So we've got, we're only looking at the rear yard. Motion for approval, have a second. No, we
We need to vote on.
don't have a second, so motion's been made to review the,
No, we do. We have a second
You
on
do.
that.
The original motion exists as it was. It's just now been changed, so it's ready for a vote or deliberation if you want to.
all right, so all in favor of approval of the rear yard retaining wall?
The motion as amended. Yeah, aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, so that motion is approved. So that's addressing the variance request for the rear yard retaining wall. So we're closing that book.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're back to the front yard retaining wall variance request.
And I would make a motion to disapprove the variance request of the front yard retaining wall. Which, yeah, period.
Okay, so motion made for disapproval of the variance request to allow for a taller than allowable retaining wall within a front yard. Is there a second?
Nobody seconds, it dies, so it's fine.
Okay, so no second, motion dies, right? Okay. So a motion for approval of the variance request to allow for a taller than allowable retaining wall within the front yard.
I do make a motion to approve with the conditions that it's a minimum of 8 feet.
Okay?
Minimum.
Minimum, I'm sorry, maximum of 8 feet, sorry. That would have been better.
Okay, so motion made by Jeff for approval of the, or for approval to allow for a taller than allowable retaining wall within the front yard with the condition that a maximum of
It's
8
8
feet is visible.
Yes.
Okay. So motion made by Jeff. I'll second that motion. Discussion? I'll just ask staff, is that enough clarity on? Okay.
I think it goes back to my original concern here. You've got a wall that's 10 feet and we're going to make it 8 feet. You're kind of cheating the math there a little bit. And I don't even know if 8 feet's the right, like if it's realistic. So for us to put that out and say, go make this become this height without any engineer, any architecture design,
It's totally engineered. He's just going to fill it in the front. He's going to bring it up to 8 feet, which in Avalon, that's pretty much typical.
but can he, I don't know. I'm not the
That's
one
up-
that's saying
that's
he
up
can
to
do it.
him. He'll
Yeah.
have to deal with that. He'll have to deal with that in a manner that it stays in place.
Okay, so motion made for approval of the front yard retaining wall variance request.
Before we take a vote on this motion, I'd like to look to the applicant and say, does that seem as if it's a reasonable height?
Yes, sir.
Finished
Considering the
grade?
fact that the wall we're talking about is actually the exit to the steps of the home, it's not really a retaining wall. It allows them to leave the house. It frames the steps, if you look at the picture. And then the wall gets smaller. But we can easily fill it to 8 feet.
Could you fill it to 6?
In areas, yes.
The motion's for 8
I
on
know.
the floor, so.
And I guess, and as we're discussing this motion as a board, the thing that's sticking out in my mind is the number of homeowners from that area who wrote us notices talking about the optics and the visual impact that this.
I have some
particular
pictures of their houses.
wall- And they're not here in front of us, but there's been some public concern for the aesthetics here, and I just want to be sensitive to that.
No, absolutely.
And that's the piece that I'm stuck on, because I think two elements. It certainly, it is a hardship, and it is a unique topographical piece of property. The third piece is when the planners for this city put in place wall heights for front yards, it was to avoid aesthetically less than pleasing, and probably safety issues as well. And I don't feel like I can, in good conscience, say this uphold, or that voting against the ordinance doesn't potentially impair the intent of the original guidance. So that's my piece.
Yeah. And I will say, I don't disagree with that. I think for me, Avalon is probably the upper end of the exception, just where,
It's hilly land over there.
Yeah.
I get it, it's tough.
so we have a motion for approval of the front yard variance request for the retaining wall with a condition that it isn't visible above 8 feet, I think.
Maximum height of the wall is not to exceed 8 feet,
Yep,
So,
and make a concerted effort to make it less.
yes, sir. We haven't done our final grade.
okay, so we have the motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, so it's 2-1, so Jonathan, Jeff, yes, Greg, no. So motion second item is approved, so I guess both of these are approved, one with conditions.
My question is should I call Randy and those guys to have it come out and inspect it after we get the grade and resubmit to Charlotte?
I would definitely stay in contact with codes and then reach out
Yeah.
to city staff after the meeting
Okay.
and make sure it's real clear what's happening.
Yeah,
So
we
I
want to
think,
prove our compliance.
yeah, the other part of this too is, we're definitely not condoning building structures and then coming for the variance request after the fact, so, but
I understand that.
appreciate
We
it.
have
Just
someone
be-
here from the Building and Neighborhood Services Department. She'll make sure that everyone that's involved in the review of this is aware of the motion and approvals tonight.
And frankly,
We'll be accountable to them.
There's legitimacy to his concerns, so you know what the public has said in the
That's right.
neighborhood. So just be cognizant of that.
That's right.
Do what
Thank
you can, man.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
thank you, guys.
So So next is item number 3. It's a variance request to waive the substantial improvement requirement to raise the first floor elevation of a historic structure above the base flood elevation located within the historic preservation overlay, the floodway fringe overlay, and the central Franklin overlay for the property located at 150 Franklin Road. Staff?
Thank you. This site consists of 6.02 acres and is zoned Civic Institutional District. It is, as you stated, located in the Historic Preservation Overlay, the HPO, the Central Franklin Overlay, the CFO, and the Floodway Fringe Overlay, the FFO. The Battleground Academy Lower School Campus is the site of the 1891 Cox House that's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The historic resources feature a large addition to accommodate its adaptive reuse as a school and is a historic structure in the Franklin Historic District. The Historic Zoning Commission reviews exterior alterations to properties located within the HPO in light of the Historic District Design Guidelines and is charged with preserving and protecting historic structures from alteration that would result in an adverse impact. As the applicant intends to add on to the existing structure, the structure must meet the floodplain requirements for non-residential structures. The zoning ordinance requires non-residential structures to be elevated 1 foot above base flood elevation to meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. Variances may be issued for the repair and rehabilitation of historic structures upon a determination that the proposed work will not preclude its continued designation as a historic structure, and the variance is the minimum necessary deviation from the requirements of the zoning ordinance in order to preserve the historic character and design of the structure. The Historic Zoning Commission provides recommendations to the Board of Zoning Appeals for floodplain-related variances to historic structures. The owner of the property submitted photographs demonstrating the potential appearance of the building elevated to meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance at 1 foot above base flood elevation, which is Exhibit 1 in your packet. The Historic Zoning Commission recommended at its July 11th, 2022 meeting to keep the building's finished floor elevation as it sits currently in order to maintain the building's historic status. The proposal is the most sensitive to the architectural qualities of the historic structure and presents the least amount of adverse impact to the historic structure and the context of the overall historic district. The Historic Zoning Commission recommended that the BZA consider the proposed variance favorable for these reasons. The variance request is to reduce the required first floor elevation height and keep the building's finished floor elevation as it sits currently for the property located at 150 Franklin Road. Staff's analysis is based off of the 3 criteria that you'll consider this variance under. Criteria 1 is a showing of good and sufficient cause. The building is a historic structure in the Franklin Historic District, and the need to take measures to maintain this status amount to good and sufficient cause for granting a variance. This proposal is the most sensitive to the architectural qualities of the historic structure and present the least amount of adverse impact to the historic structure and the context of the overall historic district. The Historic Zoning Commission recommended to the BZA that they consider the proposed variance favorable for those reasons. Staff finds that this criteria is met. Criteria number 2 is a determination that failure to grant the variance would result in exceptional hardship. As the structure currently sits below base flood elevation, the applicant would be required to raise the building to comply with the zoning requirements, which would significantly alter the character defining features of the historic home. The adverse impact to the character of both the historic structure and the historic district by raising the building by such a considerable amount would be an exceptional hardship. For these reasons, staff believes that this criteria is met. For criteria 3, it is a determination that the granting of a variance will not result in increased flood heights, additional threats to public safety, extraordinary public expense, create nuisance, cause fraud on or victimization of the public, or conflict with existing local laws or ordinances. This structure has been in existence at its current elevation since 1891, and keeping the structure at its current as it currently sits would not result in any changes to the flooding patterns and risks that have existed in the structure's history or that exist today. The Historic Zoning Commission recommended approval of the variance to maintain the structure's historic status and the integrity of the historic district. And based on the recommendation of the Historic Zoning Commission, along with analysis of conditions on the lot, staff finds that granting the variance would not result in any of the outcomes listed above and that the third criteria is met. The recommended motion is to move to approve the variance to waive the substantial improvement requirements to raise the first floor elevation of a historic structure above the base flood elevation. It would remain in place, located within the Historic Preservation Overlay and the Floodway Fringe Overlay at 150 Franklin Road, because the criteria for granting a variance has been met. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, staff. The applicant's present, if you could step forward for us and state your name.
Jim Cross with Oversight, representing BGA tonight. Also Kent McLaughlin, the project architects here. We appreciate staff's recommendation. We have nothing further to add to that and respectfully request your approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So next, we'll open the public comment. Are there any citizen comments?
Did you receive any?
No, sir.
Motion to close the public hearing?
Okay, motion made to close the public comment. Is there a second?
Second.
Second made by Jeff. All in favor say aye. Aye. No one's opposed, so public comment's closed. Questions from the board? Ready to entertain a motion if you guys are ready.
Yeah, I'll submit a motion to approve the variance to waive the substantial improvement requirement to raise the first floor elevation of a historic structure above the base flood elevation to remain in place, located within the Historic Preservation Overlay and the Floodway Fringe Overlay at 150 Franklin Road, because the criteria for granting this variance has been met.
Motion for approval made by Greg. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, the variance request is approved. So next item, it's item number 4. It's going to be a variance request to allow parking to the side of a proposed principal building within urban frontage for the properties located at 553 Franklin Road and 557 Franklin Road. Staff?
Thank you. The subject parcels are located at 553 and 557 Franklin Road, and the applicant is seeking a variance to park on the sides of a proposed building with urban frontage. The parcel is currently zoned CI Civic and an Institutional District, and the applicant has requested to rezone to the PD Plan District. As part of the rezoning and development plan review, there is a parking location variance identified as necessary prior to the rezoning and development plan items proceeding to the Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. The property is commonly known as 555 Franklin Road PUD subdivision. As part of the development plan, the applicant is seeking to place parking to the sides of the proposed principal building on the site. The proposed use is assisted living, memory care, and independent living. It has been determined that the only applicable building type for the mix of uses proposed is the multifamily building type. This building type is permitted in a plan district but may only use urban frontage. Urban frontage requires that all parking be located behind the building unless it is parallel parking along the street or internal drive. The applicant is proposing a primary structure on the site that places parking to the sides and parallel parking along the front. Staff's analysis regarding criteria 1. A portion of the subject property is within the 500-foot hillside hillcrest buffer and the hillside hillcrest overlay, but the proposed site is only affected by the 500-foot hillside hillcrest buffer. This buffer requires that structures be sited to minimize grading and tree removal. This property has 17 to 30 feet of grade change from the base of the protected slopes within the buffer to Franklin Road. To accommodate this grade change and with respect to the existing slope of the land, the proposed building is designed with a stepped foundation. Staff believes that this requirement is met. In regards to criteria 2, staff finds that the strict application of the zoning ordinance would not result in peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties to or exceptional or undue hardship upon the owner of the property. The variance request is unique to the applicant's proposed plan and not generally to all potential designs for the site, meaning that the applicant could design a use and plan for the site that meets the requirements of the zoning ordinance. The shape of the site nor the circumstances of the site require the building to be the shape or scale proposed, and no site conditions specifically require parking areas to be located to the sides of the building. The City of Franklin zoning ordinance categorizes continuum of care as a civic and institutional use and is allowed within the CI Civic Institutional Zoning District as long as the amount of age-restricted independent living does not exceed the 30% of the total square footage. Under the CI Civic Institutional Zoning District, the landscape frontage is acceptable and allows for parking to the sides of the proposed building. The applicant is exceeding the 30% threshold and therefore classifies the building as a multifamily building and triggers the zone change to PD plan development. Staff finds that the proposed plan introduces a self-imposed hardship, one that can be resolved by redesigning to meet the zoning ordinance. Staff finds this criteria not met. In regards to criteria 3, staff finds that in granting relief of the urban frontage and allowing parking to the side of a proposed multifamily building would be impairing the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. The multifamily building type is meant to have ground floor activated units and rooms with strong pedestrian connections around the building. Granting the variance to allow parking to the side of the building changes the context of the building from residential to non-residential. No other residential structures are associated with frontage types that permit parking lots to the side of the buildings. If the applicant would like to utilize a different building type or frontage type that is more consistent with the continuum of care use, there is an option to reduce the number of independent living units to the 30% threshold permitted by the zoning ordinance and submit a plan under the Civic Institutional Zoning District instead. Staff finds criteria 3 not met. The recommended motion is to move to deny the variance request to allow parking to the side of a proposed principal building with urban frontage for the properties located at 553 Franklin Road and 557 Franklin Road because the 3 criteria for granting a variance have not been met. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, staff. Is the applicant present? If you could step forward for us and state your name.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, my name is Greg Gamble, and I'm representing the applicant, Ryan Companies. Sean Hunt is with me tonight from Ryan Companies if you have any questions specifically for them. I know that you have our presentation on your computer, but I also brought a paper copy. If it's more convenient, you'd like to look at the paper copy, I have one available for you.
Yeah, I'd like to
That would
look
be
at it,
great, because
Greg.
I don't know that we have like a
You have
schematic
2,
drawing
Greg?
I have enough for all of you.
we could share.
I also brought tonight just the one page from the zoning ordinance that talks about the frontage types. So you've got that in front of you as well. I've got a couple of references I'd like to make to that as we proceed. Would you like a copy?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, appreciate it.
I would like to point out that the only difference in what I just handed you and what was originally submitted is the actual variance request. Ms. Randolph pointed out during her review process that our actual variance is to allow parking to the side of a proposed principal structure with a building that has a requirement for urban frontage. So I just changed that one sentence just to make sure that I was keeping up with what staff's recommendation was there. What you're looking at here is the proposed plan for the continuum of care facility. A continuum of care facility has assisted living, memory care. It has all of the amenities associated with those, including a cafeteria, a place for dining, restaurants, cafe, spa, hair salon. All of those are amenities and accessory uses within the structure. There's also independent living associated with this facility, so someone might move into the independent living, but then as their needs need to be met in a different way, they can move to the assisted living portion of the building. On the next page, you'll see, so flipping over to the next page, this is a slope analysis, and it shows the area that is the limits of disturbance. The area that is our kind of the back portion of our parking lot there, it must stop where the 14% slopes start. So what this is showing you is that at Franklin Road, the slopes aren't too bad. But as you get closer to the hill, the steepness of the land increases, kind of like a parabolic curve as it goes toward the top of the hill. The actual hillside preservation is much further. It's not even on this page. So you don't see where those 20% slopes start, but those pink slopes there are 20% or greater. The yellow slopes are 14 to 20%. So I wanted to point that out to you because it's very important to understand that the further back we get, the further in the backyard of this building that we get, the steeper the slopes are. Parking lots in the city of Franklin per engineering design standards cannot exceed 5% slope. For handicap space, they cannot exceed 2% slope. So it's important for us to design our site, and this site in particular, in such a way to limit or reduce the need for retaining walls or site disturbance. On the next page, we're showing a cross-section, and this is really more illustrative for you. But what it shows is the front of the building is 3 stories. The lower level is where we're required to have memory care and the assisted living, and it also is where the office is going to be located. But memory care is very important. It must be located on that ground floor. The first and second floors of the building will be assisted living and memory care. The upper floor is the independent living.
Is memory care required to be on the first floor per
State
healthcare
regulations.
guidance?
That's right, yes. Sure is. What happens is if we have all of the parking at the back, we're using that back portion of the building as a retaining wall so that we can transition the grades up. The parking actually ends up at the second level. So in an emergency situation, we're having to take memory care and ambulatory residents to the back portion of the building, up an elevator, and then out to the parking lot in the rear for an area of safe refuge. What we're asking to do is to distribute that parking to the sides of the building, not park in front. We do have some parallel parking in front for guests as they arrive, but to have parking located along the sides of the building so that we have areas of safe refuge at the multiple levels of the building, at the lower level and then the second level in the back. You'll notice in our site plan on the first page there that we don't have parking located in the very back of the building. That's where our service area is going to be. That's where trash is going to be picked up. That's where the food deliveries are going to be. But also, if we start adding more parking adjacent to those steeper slopes, we're going to increase the amount of retaining walls. And that's really for any way in which this site is developed, whether it's developed as a church, whether it's developed really for about any civic use, they're going to have that same issue. The closer you get to the hill, you end up with more issues because of the engineering requirements for a parking lot. There are really 4 elements that stand out as needs for this variance request. The first we talked about regarding emergency situations and the need to step the building and transition the site. The second is the increase in distance for our residents who have to park in the back and then traverse across the site, but also traverse all the way through the building. And these are seniors. Not everyone needs a wheelchair, but as we get older, we have trouble walking long distances. Third is having those evacuation concerns. Fourth is a concern of the conflicts between those utility services, trash at the back of the building, and the parking operations. One thing that was pointed out by staff was in regards to the development plan. We are requesting a development plan. We are requesting a development plan because our independent living exceeds the 30% requirement or threshold for civic institutional continuum of care use in the zoning ordinance. We're exceeding that number by 19%. So 49% of our total building is independent living. That 19% is about 50,000 square feet as it relates to the total 265,000 square foot building. Meeting that 30% threshold would really not change the shape or size of the footprint of this building on the ground floor, where we have the assisted living, independent living, and all of the supporting services. We're talking about what happens on that third floor. That 50,000 square feet might be one of the wings on the side, but that's a business decision, and they have the ability to go to the board, mayor, and alderman through a PUD to make that request for that additional square footage. So that's what we're doing. If you look here to this frontage types, this is straight from the zoning ordinance. I'd like to point out that for civic institutional base zones, there are 3 frontage types that are permitted. If you look in the far right column, it lists those permitted districts. Yard frontage, parking frontage, and landscape frontage are all permitted within the civic institutional base zone. You'll notice then under urban frontage, civic institutional is not listed as a zone where urban frontage is allowed. However, continuum of care facilities can only be built using the multifamily building type. So that's the second column here, the permitted building types. And you'll notice that multifamily building type is only listed under urban frontage, where civic institutional does not allow that frontage type. So in this particular instance, we found an error that staff and planning plan to amend in the future. But for this urban frontage type, here, in order to do a continuum of care, you have to submit a PUD. You have to apply for the PD district. And so we're checking that box as well with the application that's been filed. As a result of that, we believe that we are in keeping with the intent of the zoning ordinance as it's currently written, and we are not substantially impairing the intent of the zoning ordinance and zoning map because we would be then in compliance with the multifamily building type and the PD district. I know that's a lot to consider, and happy to answer any questions that you may have. We have a few people who are representatives from the neighborhood that would like to make a comment as well.
Thank you. So next we'll move to citizen comments. I do have 2 public comment cards. I'll start with those. If there's additional, feel free to take those as well. So we'll start with Miss Regina Hutto. Hutto?
I live at 238 Gateway Court, which is adjacent to this proposed property. I'm actually the president of the Gateway Village Homeowners Association, and my front door actually will be where the proposed driveway and parking is, which is the subject of this variance. I have met with the land developer, architect, Mr. Gamble, on several occasions, and we have been able to work together. I've looked at their concept plans, and we feel like they're being very respectful neighbors, because what we currently view is just woods and somewhat of a older home that's kind of dilapidated. For us, they have, we're going to work with us on landscaping on their side and our side, because we would like to keep what we currently see, which is amazing trees and foliage during the summer, spring, and even winter. But we believe that this senior living community is really a good complement to our neighborhood. I have seen their proposed plans, and it looks very similar to how all of our townhomes look. And I've talked to a lot of the residents, that's why there's none here. I'm kind of just speaking for the community, and this really is the best opportunity for us to get some great neighbors. I believe that they're willing to work with us and listen to what we have to say about how it looks over there. And this proposed parking literally is what I see when I look out my front door. So I know that they are going to work with us to make this presentable and something that we can live with. We do not have any objectionable thoughts of what they're doing. They have come to us with this change, moving the parking off to the side. And we just hope that you would consider, approving their variance for this parking situation. That's really all I have to say.
Thanks for your comments.
You're welcome.
So next I have Mr. Philip Cantrell.
I'm not as good speaking on the fly as her, so I wrote mine down, if that's okay. Good evening. My name is Philip Cantrell, and I live at 103 Windsor Way in Highgate Subdivision, which is directly behind the property, also immediately adjoining Clearview Baptist Church. It wasn't mentioned in the presentation, but Clearview currently owns this property and will remain immediately to the south, be the neighbor immediately to the south. I believe I'm qualified to address this application for multiple reasons. Not only is my home adjacent to Clearview property, but I'm also one of 3 trustees of Clearview Baptist Church. I know the proposed plan very well, and I represent both my family's interests and my church's interests in this matter. I'd also like to point out that Senior Pastor Jason Cruz and Associate Pastor John Gardner are here in support of our comments, in support of this application variance. I'd like to offer just a couple of quick comments. First, I believe that the proposed parking along the sides of the new senior living community will in no way negatively impact either my own property or that of the church. In fact, the southern boundary of this property primarily faces the north parking lot of the church. So you'd have parking lot. Second, as a Franklin resident, local business executive, I understand better than most that zoning is an important mechanism by which communities assure that growth and development occurs in a responsible and thoughtful manner. These rules and policies are important. Yet I also understand there's a limit to how well a blanket set of rules, such as those embodied in zoning ordinance, can accurately and appropriately address every single condition on every single parcel of land. This Board of Zoning Appeals feels a very important and most necessary function. You wed a purpose and a plan, not force a one-size-fits-all policy on a generic plot of real estate simply for the sake of an isolated rule, and we've seen that in action here tonight already. I submit to you that the piece of land on which this proposed development sits is unique in the city. Its topography, access, and neighbors are unique. So I believe it requires a unique review. Beyond that, I understand there are also 12 other senior living communities in Franklin, and all of them are allowed parking their cars all around the buildings, yet for some reason this is not being allowed in this case, even though the unique topography of this site calls for this capability more than most of the others. Aside from a theoretical urban planner, who would really care if there's parking along the sides? It certainly doesn't appear that in this particular case, the next door neighbors mind at all, me being one of those neighbors. With that said, I respectfully ask that you approve this applicant's request. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any additional public comments at all? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close.
Second.
Motion made to close by Jeff, second by Greg. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? So public comments closed.
sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. We're running longer than normal. I'm
Your eyes are starting to go on you, John.
starting to get a little tired.
I have a question for staff. We did receive emails. I remember Mr. Cantrell's as well as a number of other concerned citizens. Was there anything else that came in or any phone calls that maybe we haven't heard of?
No, sir.
Thank you.
I'll ask one question. So the urban frontage, so we've heard a lot about the urban frontage, heard about percentage of units. How far does that urban frontage run? I guess I'm assuming Gateway is within that. How far down Franklin Road south does that run, roughly?
The urban frontage is based on the property. So a building's frontage is from its front building facade to the property lines. So what is allowed within that zone is the frontage.
Yep.
Does
So
that make sense?
Yeah, so the
Okay.
urban frontage, though, it's based on the zoning district, though. So let's say, so to Greg's point, I guess, in the presentation, the urban frontage, at least on this diagram, kind of out of section 7.2,
Mm-hmm.
anything multifamily, so any of those zones, PD, NC, CC.
So urban frontage is based on the building type and the zoning district. It's sort of, you have to kind of measure both components of a plan.
Right.
So
So-
in the restructuring of, or the rethought analysis, is the CI going to be, is staff going to consider CI in this category?
What I believe is proposed in the zoning ordinance update for this year is that when continuum of care buildings are in the CI district or the GO district, that they are allowed to use landscape frontage. So that the building type will still be multifamily, but that the landscape frontage will be allowable in those two conditions.
So when that indeed comes into play, this would be approved based on that one
No,
criteria?
this plan has more independent living units that are than are permitted in CI zoning district.
Okay.
So what they could do is today, under the change, they could reduce the number of independent living units within this footprint, and then that plan would be approvable.
Okay.
The issue is that they're requesting more units. So they have to, he said 19%, I believe.
49% of 30.
So what is the, like, from a zoning standpoint, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at that, percentage where you say 30%. What's the goal of that kind of intent there?
The goal there was that we understand that the continuum of care use that is ever evolving. It came, we used to call it nursing homes.
Right.
We don't use that term anymore because this idea of how you age in place is continually evolving. And so the idea is that you could have a certain amount of units on a site where perhaps your partner or an additional caregiver could live there in the same structure or on the same site, and that would be independent living because those aren't state licensed beds. But that the continuum of care uses would be the primary use still, the state licensed beds.
Okay.
And at some point, the threshold of going above that, there's the balance of, is this a continuum of care use? Is this a multifamily use?
Yeah.
I'd also like to point out, using this chart as an example, Chelsea mentioned this in her staff report, but if you look at the landscape frontage, which is essentially what is wanting to happen on this site, under the permitted building types, you can see that none of those are residential. So just to clarify that point one more time.
So that was landscape frontage that you were referencing there? Or was it urban frontage?
So what is being proposed on the site is essentially landscape frontage. Landscape frontage allows parking on the sides of the building. If you notice, that type of situation in the zoning ordinance, the intent is that that situation is for non-residential buildings.
I think the best part of this is that the building's not built yet, and that we are able to have a conversation about it prior to a substantial investment, and that makes me at least a little bit happy.
That's comment of the night right there, Greg, I think.
There's a reason we have these processes in place, and we appreciate when developers and interested citizens go through the channels so that we don't have to have different conversations. And I suppose, and maybe this is more of a question for the board, or perhaps even a question for you, Greg, as you looked at different concepts, and you think about the use of this property, you're trying to get it 49% or almost half of the property into a different type of care or a different type of resident in the property. Is that, am I remembering that correctly from your presentation? 40, I think you said 30% is the cap, and
Oh,
another
30% is the
19%.
cap for the current zoning ordinance for independent living. That is not industry standard. There is industry standard that people who are in the independent living move into the assisted living. So there's a scalable
Makes sense.
response to just the management of the building itself. So a 50-50 mix is industry standard. At the time the zoning ordinance was adopted with the 30%, we wanted to strike a line somewhere, I'm guessing. And so the line was struck at 30% to start. And my client said, well, that's not our business model. We need to pursue a plan that can go to the board and mayor and alderman. I'm happy to know that at some point in time in the future that continuum of care could be put into a category that would allow for landscape frontage. I think that that would be appropriate as a residential use for the landscape frontages. But yes, today what we're asking for is that option to park on the side, not only because this is continuum of care, but also because of the slope constraints of the site. Probably more so regarding the slope constraints of the site than we are the use of the building, although that does have a factor.
Sure. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Ready to entertain a motion?
And the plan as designed before us, the only variance that would need to be requested would be, or that would need to be discussed or granted, would be the ability to park on the side of the property.
Yes, sir.
What about the parking spaces that are available in the front of the property?
They're compliant with the
Okay.
parallel parking in the front because they're allowed that by urban frontage.
Okay. That being said, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, to move to approve the variance request to allow parking to the side of a proposed principal building with urban frontage for the properties located at 553 Franklin Road and 557 Franklin Road, because in my opinion, the three criteria for granting this variance have been met.
Okay, so motion for approval to allow parking to the side of the principal building with urban frontage. Is there a second?
I second.
Discussion? I'll make a comment. I do struggle with the percentage rule. I guess over time, I feel like there's flex in there. I wish we would kind of look at that from a staff standpoint of hard lines. I do get the intent, I guess, with you don't want it to become multifamily, but I think that's very fluid, kind of what that could look like over time, and also based on demographics as well.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I agree.
And I also think that in Williamson County, and in particular in Franklin, aging care, and I don't know if that's the proper word or if I've stepped in some sort of politically incorrect world there, but the care of our elder population, which I'll be hopefully, God willing, one of in the future, is an opportunity for us to do better. I think we need development of this nature in our community, and for that reason, hopefully we can vote this through.
Any comments, Jeff?
No, I agree.
Okay.
Can I-
All right, so
I
motion.
would like to make a point. I'm sorry, I did misspeak, and I just want to clarify that for the record. The update to the zoning ordinance is that we are proposing that in the CI district, that urban frontage is added as a permitted or required frontage type. And that in the GO district, that urban frontage is added as a required frontage type, so that the use of a multifamily building, which is continuum of care, align with the requirement of urban frontage. So in the future, continuum of care uses would be required to have parking in the rear, not on the side. So that was the opposite of what I said. I wanted to clarify that. I apologize.
And that's to be enacted?
That is to be inactive. The goal is that it would be effective January 1st, 2023, for any projects coming in after that date.
Thank you for that, Amy. Doesn't change my motion.
So motion for approval, second. I've had some discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, item number 4 is approved. Last but not least, is there a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
A motion made by Jeff for adjournment. Is there a second? Second by Jonathan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye, aye.
Have a great night.
Feels like,
Thank
get
you.
us out of here.